No, it's very good to be back. It is true. We tried a couple weeks ago. The weather didn't support us too well. Even though even this morning when I got up, they said, well, we can't go in because the wind is blowing too much. We'll have to go someplace else. And I thought, I can't miss it 2 times in a row. But evidently, the winds were calmed, and we were able to land safely. So we made it here all right. But to me, this is a very important issue, of course, talking about families and human life. Obviously, human life is something very important to me, having dealt with it in a very real way of delivering a lot of babies. As a matter of fact, I have a daughter. Carol and I have our youngest daughter practices OBGYN now. But delivering an infant is, very exciting and very crucial and very, emphatic. But there's a legal matter involved too that I mention a lot when I'm talking to people who use the more libertarian type of argument. It's the woman's body, she can do whatever she wants, she can have an abortion and that sort of thing. And although I don't detest the word and the term libertarian, to me that means believes in liberty, but I don't like them to use that argument that believing in liberty means that you can kill the unborn. And there's a good legal reason. And the legal reason is that I, as a physician, I had a legal responsibility to protect the unborn. If I made a mistake or did something wrong, I could be sued for that. If you're in a car accident and the unborn is killed, that individual is liable. So there is a legal entity there. There's no doubt about it. Also, inheritance rights are established at conception, not at the time of birth. So we're dealing with a legal entity. But the one point that I like to make about the abortion issue is what we as a society have to resolve, and this is probably just outside the legal aspect, and that is, what is the difference between a child, a fetus, 1 minute before birth versus 1 minute after birth? Because 1 minute after birth, if a distraught young woman has a baby and doesn't know what's going on, and the baby's born and she throws that baby away, the police are called and she gets charged with a homicide. But if she had gone a day before, she could have had the abortion done and the doctor paid a lot of money. Now, where's the difference? And those people who argue, well, it's the woman's body, she can do with her body whatever she wants. But I think it's so emphatic to notice the difference. That's why respect for life is so important. And we have to understand where life comes from. Life comes from our Creator. It doesn't come from government. Liberty comes from our Creator, not from our government. And therefore, the purpose, if there is to be a purpose for government, the purpose is to protect life and liberty. And our Constitution is pretty darn good on that issue. It's protecting life and liberty, not by telling you what to do. That's not what the Constitution does. The Constitution tells the government what they're not allowed to do. There's a lot of prohibitions in the Constitution. That's why we should have high regard and high respect for the Constitution. I'm convinced if we would have done a much better job as a people and as a Congress obeying the Constitution, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in today. Liberty, to me, gives us the chance to release our creative energies. The purpose for me in life is to seek and strive for excellence and virtue. That is personal. That is not a government. Even parents can influence us, but ultimately we as individuals have to decide what the purpose of our life is. And that, for me, is seeking excellence and virtue. But this can be done so much better in a free society where we are not impeded by the government. This provides us the obligation to be responsible for ourselves. And once this is delivered to the government, this responsibility to take care of ourselves, cradle to grave, the welfareism, and whatever you need, the government's going to take care of us. That relieves the responsibility of the individual as well as the family. I frequently refer to a biblical text in 1 Samuel in chapter 8, because in the frustrations in the early history of Israel, the Israelites were always debating, should we obey God or should we have an idol? And to them, actually, to Samuel, when they came to him wanting a king, he saw the king as being an idol. It was idolatry, because the king was going to take care of them. They wanted to get rid of the system of a patriarchal society where the family was the main unit and the judge was there just to settle arguments and disputes, but not to have the king telling what to do and assuming all the responsibilities. But the people came. It wasn't even just the elders. The elders sort of gave lip service to it, but the people came, we want a king, we want a king. And Samuel argued against it. And it's a delightful chapter in chapter 8, where he goes through a litany of reasons why you don't need a king. And we don't have a king today, but unfortunately I think we're drifting to the point that our big government is king. You know, and the government tells us what we can do and be responsible for us. And if we don't have a house, they'll give us a house. If we don't have education, we get free education. If we're hungry, we get food stamps, and deficits don't matter. And if you need money, you print the money. And that we have this moral obligation to police the world. It goes on and on. The king will take care of us. But the interesting thing that Samuel did in this was to describe exactly what the king might do. He says he's going to take up your young women and young men. The king will tax you. And he says it'll be very, very costly. It's going to cost a lot of money. And I kept thinking, how appropriate could that be when you think today, if you concede that, you know, our big government is our king, think of what it's cost us. It's total out of control, and we have lost our confidence in ourselves, in our family, and in our God in order to make our government our Savior and is going to take care of us continuously. So this is what we have done. We have rejected the notion that the family unit is the ultimate family, the ultimate unit to take care of us and to sort out our problems. But just think of what's happened to the families. Think of what's happened since the 1960s. In the 1960s, I was still studying medicine and in OBGYN. And they were defying the law against abortion. They just rejected it. We had the Vietnam War going on. I was in the service for 5 years in the 60s, know about so many of the problems they were having. There was a breakdown of a lot of our morality. Abortion became popularized, and drugs became popularized. And then the family unit broke down after that. Now, you know, I can't know the statistics. It's probably like 60% of minorities have their children out of wedlock, but it's sharply rising in white families too and others. So the family unit is not something that we have done a very good job in holding together. And quite frankly, although I've been involved in politics for a long time and talk about a lot of the issues, war and peace and monetary and budgets and deficits and all, ultimately, you know, the most important thing to me, if they say, well, how would you solve the problem? I says, I can't solve the problems, and governments can't solve your problems. The most the government can do is obey the law, and if the law says the government is there to protect your liberties and put the responsibilities on you, that's the most the government can do. Then the burden falls on us. Then it falls on our education, on our parents, and our churches. And if we can't take care of ourselves, then like our founder said, if you don't deserve the liberty. A moral society is what is required to have this Constitution work. And now with the breakdown, the less moral the society becomes, the greater the breakdown. And so ultimately I see that the family is the most important. You know, there's another issue that I talk about a whole lot, and I get biblical admonitions on this issue as well, and that has to do with the money issue. Money is supposed to be honest. The Bible says you should have honest weights and measures. You're not supposed to cheat, and you're not supposed to lie. And yet, here we have a government, we really, it's so out of control that they're I don't know whether we should call them liars, others would, but they're always telling you, the politicians are always going to tell you what they're going to do for you. Well, how are they going to do it? What do they have? They produce nothing. They have to steal it from somebody and give it to somebody else. Then if you don't have enough taxes to pay the bills, you create this counterfeit machine called the Federal Reserve. Oh, we spent $50 billion last year we didn't have. I'll print the money. And that's painless, no taxes, you don't have to borrow money. But the whole thing is it's still theft, it's counterfeit, it's illegal because everybody suffers. You know, in the last year, we've doubled, maybe close to tripling the money supply with this crisis. The crisis comes on because we spent too much, borrowed too much, regulated too much, and printed too much. So the crisis comes, which was predictable. So what are we doing? We're printing more, spending more deficits and more regulations, and they think that's going to solve. You can't solve immorality with more immorality. And that is why... And that is why this recession is not ending soon. It's going to be with us. And I don't like to call it a recession because that sounds like this is pretty mediocre, you know, not a big deal. And I do understand that Iowa in some ways is similar to Texas. We probably haven't suffered like some of the other states, but a lot of people are suffering. There's probably people in this state suffering, but there's a people in this country. True unemployment is 22%. That's depression. And they fudge the figures, they deceive us with the figures, they tell you there's no inflation because they measure inflation by the CPI. Well, when the CPI gets to growing too much, they change the numbers. And they tell you there's prices going up at a rate at 2%. What about your fuel prices? I think they're going up a little faster than 2%. And what about medical care? And what about food? All of these things, prices are going up rapidly, and yet the government says, don't sweat it. If we tell you there's inflation, we'll have to give cost of living increases, you know, to Social Security beneficiaries. So the whole system is based on these illusions and these false promises. But counterfeiting is a crime. The founders hated counterfeiting, because they went through an episode of runaway inflation with the continental dollar. And for that reason, they wrote into the Constitution, you cannot emit bills of credit, no paper money, only gold and silver can be legal tender. That's still the law of the land. Yet just recently, a man who believes strongly in this minted his own gold and silver coins, tried to circulate them, and the government came down pretty hard on him. You can't challenge the monopoly. They charged him with terrorism, fraud, and counterfeiting. Here the government that prints all this money, counterfeits the money, they accuse this guy, he's 65 years old, he'll probably go to prison for 15 or 20 years. It's a life sentence for him to do what he thought was constitutional and right. And morally, he was like, nobody charged him with stealing anything or defrauding them or not giving them their silver or gold, and yet they want to put him in prison. And yet the counterfeiters now are, you know, still in operation. But in 1792, after the Constitution was written, the early Congress wrote a coinage act to define the dollar as 371 grains of silver, and that was a dollar. That was the same weight as a Spanish milled dollar, and that was the definition and understanding of what a dollar was. But there's only a few federal laws, national laws in the Constitution. Counterfeiting is one of them, as well as piracy and treason. But under the 1792 Coinage Act, the penalty was death. That's how strongly they felt about somebody duplicating bits of money. And yet, no, it's the Federal Reserve. They give us low interest rates. They allow us to buy houses for nothing. No down payment. Wonderful. It's a free ride. It's a free lunch. At the same time, those in the Austrian School of Economics knew it was a bubble. They knew it was deceitful. And guess what? The people who made the billions on Wall Street pumping out these derivatives and all these mortgages, finally it collapses like many of us predicted. So the bailouts come. Guess who got bailed out? The very people who are ripping us off, they get bailed out. Who loses? The people who got suckered in to taking these mortgages. They can't pay their mortgages. They lose their job and they lose their house. I mean, the system is in bad shape. It goes back, though, to the fundamentals that we have allowed ourselves in this country to accept the notion that we wanted a king. We need a king to take care of us, and the king provides free food and free jobs and take care of us from cradle to grave. And this is the problem that we face today. And of course, the crisis is ongoing, and we'll have to make a decision. The decision is being made right now. I'm always delighted to come to colleges, and we have such great turnouts because the young people are very much looking at this because you know what you're inheriting. You know what you're getting. Yeah, I don't know. I can't believe anybody in this room would say, oh, don't sweat it. I'll be on Social Security and they'll take care of me. I mean, that is so far removed. I'd be much more interested in telling the young people that if we had a true revision of our system and go back to the Constitution, would allow you to take care of your old age and get you out of those systems and take care of yourself. That's what we need, and get the government out of deficit financing and inflation and creating all these problems that we have. So this is going to be a challenge because I think things are going to get worse. But I see great hope in what's happening. There's a lot of people now waking up. I think it's part of the Tea Party movement. We've had enough of this. Cut the spending. Give us back our freedoms. Let us resume our responsibilities. But the problem in Washington is they hear probably more noise from those who say, don't cut this, don't cut this. So the people who want cuts because they have to pay the bills versus the people who are on the receiving end, it's a clash. It's not going to be easily resolved. We still have another vote coming up this week on the CR. We're still dealing with the budget that was supposed to have been passed last October. That's how big a mess it is. This is the worst it's ever been. And then they have to start thinking about a budget starting this October for next year. It's insolvable. And that is why it's going to come to an end, because they will not give up the notion of counterfeiting. What they'll do in this is they're going to bring the dollar down, and then everybody loses everything, because if a dollar doesn't function, sending out checks to Social Security beneficiaries won't do much good if it doesn't buy anything. So we have to be prepared. We can find our answers in self-reliance, family responsibilities, honest money, family life, and moral integrity. Governments reflect what the people are thinking. Today, I'm fearful. I'm encouraged because I know a growing number of people want to do the right things. But what I'm fearful of is that we take that next step upward on what we expect from our king. Because you've heard about the man on the white horse. When things get tough, people want to be safe. And although I was quite sympathetic to the arguments made after 9/11, people would tell me, oh, 9/11's horrible. You have to give up your freedoms to be safe. I don't think that's true at all. I think you're safe for a lot of other reasons than because there's a policeman outside your door. You're safe for a lot of other reasons. But what they're saying is, what could happen is we could get a worse king. We have a king now because the king is doing so much. But that is why we, as a people and as a generation, we have to make a decision what the role of government ought to be. We ought to make the role of government there to protect liberty, put the responsibility, if the government's there to give us a sound currency, free markets, good contracts, good court laws, have a judge to judge our disputes. And that's what the founders wanted. So I'm not creating this. This is not an invention of mine. It's just something that we all know. We've always studied this, but we get frustrated and we say, well, that person needs something. We better help that individual. But when you take a program and say, well, we're going to help just this 1% who needs help, which is fine, it's sentimental, you want to help them. But the reason I don't accept that is, first, that person would be helped if the pressure was put on the local community and the families to be helped. But the whole thing is, if you say the government should be doing this much and this much, it inevitably expands because you've given up 100% of the principle. So the principle is very important, even though you think it's a little bit. We won't counterfeit a lot of money. And for years, between 1913 and 1971, we had the Fed in charge and they counterfeited some, but since 1971, there were no restraints. They finally got rid of the gold standard, totally and completely. And now we've had this explosion of size of government and debt and spending. So we have a lot of problems, but we have a lot of good answers and a lot of enthusiasm. And I would say that over the years I've been talking about this issue, I was motivated by the concerns that we all have now, even in the 70s when the Bretton Woods monetary system broke down. This motivated me now. But I am much more enthused now because people are paying attention, and I think it's much more crucial. We will have to make a decision. Do we want our freedoms back and our responsibilities, or are we going to default to expanding our king? I vote for liberty. Thank you very much.
I only wish he would really let us know what's on his mind once in a while. We are on a very tight schedule. We're going to take about 10 minutes here for a little bit of Q&A, a little structured Q&A. And then we'll be doing a press avail, I believe, in the room next door. And then we need to drive to Lamar's and then fly to Pella and Iowa City quickly. But I do want to thank Dordt College and Eric Hoekstra for putting this on. Also want to remind you that May 2nd, former U.S. Senator Rick Santorum will be in attendance here at Dordt College as well. And I also want to announce that Kyle Whitehead, you are the winner of Ron Paul's In the Fed book. And if you look for the tallest guy in the building over there, Chris, he'll make sure you get that signed copy. Real quickly, Congressman Paul, I want to hit on a couple of current issues of the day. All of us who are conservative, we take a look at President Obama's budget, and then we take a look at the proposed budget of your peer, Representative Paul Ryan, out of Wisconsin. And most of us would readily say Congressman Ryan's budget is much better than President Obama's budget. However, a cursory look, not even that in-depth of a look of Congressman Ryan's budget, it even shows that his budget after 10 years adds $9 trillion to the national debt. Can you give us your insights on the budgets that are being proposed and its impact on the national debt?
Neither of those budgets will solve our problems, won't even come close. I think they're dealing with the problem in Washington as a budgetary accounting problem, and that's not it. It's what I've been trying to talk about. It's a philosophy problem. What is the philosophy of government? What should the role of government be? But if you think that it's okay and that the government will be good managers and want to run the welfare system, then that we're there. And Ryan's, even though he makes an attempt at it, doesn't reject that notion. I do. I reject that notion that we should be doing it. But I also say that if you think we should be the policemen of the world and be in 130 countries, 900 bases, and have our presidents now, it's been incremental ever since Truman, but this was the worst one because it was done without consultation with the Congress. We went into a new war now in Libya, and it's sort of a humanitarian war, but believe me, we don't go into these wars without some ulterior motives. So if you think we need to do that, you might say, oh yeah, some of your ideas are okay, but we need to settle these disputes around the world. If you give that argument, I'll tell you what, we can't do it. I happen to think that the best place to start is cutting this. We spend $1.2 trillion maintaining our empire. I don't think we're safer for a minute, and we're going broke. All great societies and and the empires have all ended for foreign policy reasons. That's what brought the Soviets down. And it's so ironic that we're in Afghanistan for going on 11 years, the same place that brought the Russians down. So I have very strong beliefs about our foreign policy for moral and philosophical reasons, but also for political reasons that I think you can get the American people to cut some of that. So I have a little trouble when the Republicans come up and say, I just told you how strongly I'm opposed to all this welfareism, but to go and say, well, we're going to cut food stamps and not touch an embassy in Baghdad. We're building embassies around the world that cost $1 billion. We tried to strike some money from infrastructure building in Afghanistan, $600 billion. We got 100 people to support it. You can't build bridges in this country. So I think it'd be much easier politically, but that's something that you need to think about, is whether you could say, yes, it's time that we had a different foreign policy. It's been very Republican to have that position. Eisenhower didn't like the military-industrial complex. Robert Taft didn't even want to be in NATO. The founders, of course, always argued for non-intervention, no entangling alliances, no policing the world, and I like that idea. But to me, it's not isolationism, because isolationism is where you don't want to trade with people and talk to people. I want to open up trade with Cuba so you can sell farm products down to Cuba and a few things like that.
After averting the government shutdown over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal and other major periodicals wrote that the next fight is going to be on raising the debt ceiling. Geithner says if we do not raise the debt ceiling, there's going to be mass chaos throughout this country. The current debt ceiling is at $4.3 trillion, I believe. Can you give us your thoughts on, should we raise the debt ceiling? If we do not raise the debt ceiling, what is the likely result of not raising the debt ceiling?
We shouldn't raise the debt ceiling. I don't vote for any of the spending. I'd be darned if I'm going to vote to raise the debt limit. No. And the fear-mongering always exists, whether it's following 9/11 for the big government people to grab hold and start passing all kinds of laws and undermining our liberties like the Patriot Act and other things, or whether it's the financial bubble. I mean, that was a major thing. The world would come to an end. Yeah, for Wall Streeters who were making billions, they would have, yeah, people ask me on TV, wouldn't there have been a depression if we wouldn't have rescued them? Yeah, for the people who deserved it. But now we ended up with a depression for the other people. I don't think it'll be nearly as bad as he claims. He wants to scare everybody into it and say if it's not passed, yeah, it would slow things up. But I can't find a set of rules on how they spend the money, because the money's still coming in. It's not like, all the money quits. They'll have to make some priorities, and decide. So it would cause some difficulty, but it can't be anything close to what it's like if you have runaway inflation, high interest rates, and price inflation. That's what's coming. Price inflation, higher interest rates, a weak economy. And that's why we'll expect the economy to go back down. But that's much worse than not raising the national debt and getting our house in order.
In 2007 and in 2008, when Congressman Paul was a presidential candidate, I said to him from time to time when I'd see him on the trail that I really appreciated him being in the race because he kept all the other candidates at least talking about the Constitution. Mark from Lincoln, Nebraska, basically saying, is there any way to get this back to common sense and to get it back to the Constitution, or are we too far down the road? Is that a lost cause today?
If it were a totally lost cause, I wouldn't be speaking out as I have been for 30 years. No, I don't think it's a lost cause at all. But it won't come from Washington on down. It has to come from the people. That's why the emphasis by the Tea Party movement and local people like yourselves to emphasize, read the Constitution. You ought to read the Constitution. But we have another problem. Now, since the Tea Party movement has had an influence, we have to write down on every piece of legislation what part of the Constitution we can justify what we're doing in. But it doesn't help us because people, there's a lot of people not like you who will understand the Constitution. They have been taught that the General Welfare Clause tells you can do anything. The Interstate Commerce Clause says you can regulate anything at all. And the Necessary and Proper Clause, which was meant to only apply to the 20-some things in Article 1, Section 8, I can pass this law because it's necessary and proper. It's the understanding of the Constitution. It's educational. This is why home education and private education is so important, and this emphasis on the Constitution could bring us back to our senses. That's where we're making progress. But if you just say, oh, it sounds good, it sounds like they'll come to their senses. No way. You better stay noisy and a lot of pressure and be involved and understand all the arguments to give to the people who say, it's the end of the world if you don't do this. We can't obey the Constitution because it's too radical, it's old-fashioned. You have to line up your answers because those who have power will cling to power and they will want more power. And it's our position is that we want to reduce the power of government. And that is probably a little more difficult because they're more tenacious.
As we come to a close, we'll let Congressman Paul make a couple of closing comments as well to wrap this up. But just from the family leader's point of view, and you can check us out at thefamilyleader.com, we believe we need to be a vehicle for truth into the culture. Where we place our emphasis on truth is God's Word, the Scripture, and the United States Constitution. That's where we believe we have the truth. We believe we need to get back to individual responsibility, marriage responsibility, where husbands and wives commit themselves to one another and love each other, to family responsibility, to where they love the children, have high expectations for the kids, provide the resources, but hold the children accountable to high expectations. We believe there needs to be church responsibility again, community responsibility, and the role of government is only to do that for us, which we cannot do for ourselves. We believe there is great hope out there, and we see that in the crowds that we're generating at every one of the locations, in the travels around the state and around the country, people really getting interested in being informed about the future, because we do have some big things that we need to address. But if you would allow Congressman Paul to wrap up and then give him a very, very warm thanks for being here at Dordt College. Congressman Paul.
Yeah, I want to thank the family leader because obviously I emphasize so much education and family, and I downplay the importance of politicians. Politicians are only, they only represent the people when they let them know what you really want. So the family leader is certainly doing what I advise that we all do, and that is promote. That doesn't mean that, obviously, it doesn't mean that I don't think we should be involved in politics. I am. It's just that that in itself is a consequence of what we do outside of politics, and there has to be an influence. In other words, we get the type of government we deserve in many ways. Government, even under dictatorships, when the dictator just really, really gets way off base, the people finally say, they tolerate a dictator for a long time, then they don't tolerate him anymore, and that is healthy too. So I think there's a lot of good things happening in this country. I think it's very, very serious. I encourage people to study and learn and participate. A lot of young people especially, they'll come in, well, what should I do? What should I do? How should I run for office? The truth is, I don't know. Whatever you want to do. But I advise people study and learn and understand. I like people to understand economics. I like people to understand our history and then be motivated, because you may be a teacher or a writer, or you may be involved in helping other candidates or whatever, but there's always something. But I was taught many years ago by somebody I admired, he says, become informed and somebody will make good use of you. So that is the goal. Your goal is to yourself and responsibility yourself. Become informed. Quite frankly, I never thought for a minute that I would be elected to Congress. My wife advised me it was dangerous running because I could get elected. But I told her I wouldn't be because of my philosophy. I don't think the people are ready for it. But evidently there were some people ready for it, and I was elected to a congressional seat. So this is, there's a responsibility for you. And if you endorse most of what I've said, you're in a category different than probably 80% of the American people or 90% of the American people, because most people never care. And I have a personal conviction that if you do know and that you do have an understanding, you have more responsibility, because at least you know the difference. If you didn't know it and you were oblivious to it all, what are we going to do about it? And that's how most people are. But it also means you're much more important because you're a smaller group and other people will follow you. if you can go out and your friends and neighbor and talk to people, and whatever job you get, you will have an influence on it. But it's most important to study hard and to make sure that you can sell the principles of liberty, and I'm sure you can do that quite well. Thank you very much.